Hi guys! This tutorial will show you how to make a line graph and scatter plot using Excel 2013. Making a line graph is really easy and requires really no more than a three-step process. First, what you want to do is upload your data onto Excel. This is a data set looking at the number of insects that appeared over the amount of time a piece of cake was left out on the lawn. When you input your data into Excel, you want to first figure out what you want on the X and Y axis. Type the values you want on your x-axis in the left-hand column and the values you want for your y-axis on the right. For scientific categorical data, your x-axis is normally your independent variable, while your y-axis is your dependent variable. In this pretend experiment, the dependent variable is the number of insects that appeared. In this case, we are looking and comparing three different insects to each other, but all collectively to the independent variable of time. So when I plot this, we should expect to see three different data sets on the same graph. Now let's see if that's what we're going to get. Left-click on the cursor and highlight all your data. Click on Insert and go to your Charts section and select a 2D line icon. This will drop down a box that will allow you to select the type of line graph you wish to create. This one I've selected in particular shows a distinct mark at each data point. Now, if your graph isn't looking the way it's supposed to look, we can manipulate how the data is presented by clicking on the Switch Row column icon. And if that option still doesn't display the data how you want it, click on the Select Data option on the right for more precise changes. For this line graph, we really only want to compare the flies and ants and spiders to each other. So we really don't want this blue line that's right here, which shows us the amount of time the cake was left out, because that's already on the x-axis. So in order to remove this blue line, we can deselect the series right here that it represents and click OK. And voila, it's gone. Next, let's take a look at the design and layout changes you can make to make this graph look better. Moving the cursor to the edge of the box and left-clicking it allows you to expand the entirety of the graph. However, if you just want to change the interior size, left-click on the chart, move your cursor to the corner, and drag it to your desired size. I personally like to leave a little bit of room on the right for my key section. So I'm going to move this right here. Now to add axis labels or trend lines or accessories to your graph, you can either click on Add Chart Element, which is right here, or you can double click on this graph, which will pop out this plus sign. And this is a really useful shortcut to add certain elements to your chart quickly. Clicking on the axis titles option will give me both my X and Y-axis labels that I need. Now if you want to change the orientation of these titles, you can do so in detail here. So what I want to record on my X-axis is the amount of time the cake was left out. And actually, I'll just label that time in hours. And then on my y-axis, it'll be the number of insects that appeared. So now, as you see, this is in the way, the y-axis is in the way, so we can double click on this chart again and minimize the chart size to give room for the y-axis. Now it's time to give your graph a title. Alright, now that you've properly labeled your graph, it might be helpful to perform some data analysis. If you're trying to find a line of best fit, right-click on one of the data points and select Add Trend Line. Since we're working with a linear graph, you want to make sure that the linear option is selected on the right. And depending how far you're trying to take this analysis, you can also choose to display the equation of your line by clicking here, and also the r-squared value. So this equation and r-squared value is meant for this orange line. So I'm just going to move it right there so everything is clear. I'm going to move this key section out of the way too. Let's do the same thing for the other two sections. This graph is really starting to look close to its finished product. One last thing I want to go over before I start talking about scatter plots is adjusting the axis intervals. As you can see, Excel has algorithmically computed what it considers the best interval for its y-axis that increases steadily in intervals of 50. But let's say I want to plot the graph in intervals of 30 instead of 50. And I also want to cap the graph at 210 instead of 250. Well, I right-click on the axis I'm trying to change and go to Format Axis, which will pop open a bunch of options on the right here for you. I can then select the minimum to 0 because I really don't want this negative 50 right here, and the maximum to 210. And since I want to increase in increments of 30 instead of 50, I'll set the major units to 30. And as you can see, the intervals of the y-axis have changed. Now the great thing about the Excel skills you've learned for a line graph so far is that they can also be applied to any graph you make on Excel. So another commonly used graph is the scatter plot. Scatter plots are extremely useful when you try to compare and contrast numerical value data, specifically when you're trying to see if there's a correlation between two sets of data. So here I've taken a list from the Microsoft Office blog if you're still a bit confused about which one to use. So feel free to pause the video to read and compare a line graph and a scatter plot and its many uses. Now moving on, let's try to make a scatter plot. Select the data you're trying to plot. Again, x-axis on the left, y-axis on the right. And go to Insert, but instead of clicking this 2D line option, you're clicking this one with the dots on it because you're trying to create a scatter plot. Again, you can maximize and minimize your chart area. And I really like to do this so that I can clearly see where my x-axis and my y-axis label are. Give these axes titles a name. And for here we have the study hours. And here we have test scores. of making a scatter plot is you want to see if there is a correlation between your x and y variables. So normally we would want to put a line of best fit through this. Again, right click on a point, add trend line. You can display the equation on the chart, display the r-squared value, and there you go. You've created, using the same skills that I've taught you in the line graph, a scatter plot. I hope you've enjoyed this video. See you next time!